Mirë mbrëma edhe mirë se vini në kallëzo për një me. Këtë shtator, ambasadorit anglez të tanishëm Nicholas Abbottit i bohën 4 vjet që është Kosovë dhe para se me shku e që është fundi i punës së tij në dhjetor, kemi vendosur ta bëjmë një intervistë për të diskutuar për gjithë temat aktuale në vend. Mr. Abbott, welcome.
Thank you.
It's unfortunate that for the last 23 years, all the interviews with the ambassadors have to start with interethnic tensions. And my first question is again, has to do with that, because we are doing this interview in the days when Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has raised the alarm saying there will be a storm against Serbs in the north. This is a statement he gave these last 2 days. Do you know of any plan of Kosovo government to expel the Serbs in the north as Vučić has stated?
No, and I think to state such a thing is slightly ridiculous. There are clearly no plans for that to happen. There always seems to be a moment when both sides seem to believe that tensions are in their interest. And really what's needed is to calm everything down. There's a need for cooperation, there's a need for patience, and there's a need, I think, for a certain level of tolerance. We've been in a situation effectively since last summer, where there have been tensions over different issues in the north. And essentially, we talk about interethnic tensions, let's be clear, this is really about the relationship between the government and the Kosovo-Serbian community in the north. It's not easy, clearly. I think both sides bear some responsibility, but in terms of where we're at this very moment, Kosovo Serbs left the institutions in the north in November. That has caused a series of issues, and we're, as always, in the middle of trying to work out what's the best way forward. I think our role, whether as the United Kingdom, or as the Quint, or as the international community as a whole, is to help to find ways forward that mean that those tensions don't spill over. Unfortunately, we saw them do so last December, and I think that was a moment of real risk, but one which was handled, frankly, correctly by all involved. I was particularly grateful for the role of KFOR and ULEX, but also, the Kosovan government did not rush to take action, showed patience, showed strategic patience around the issue, and it came to an end. I would not want to see us back in that situation, and clearly there are risks.
Then, if there is such a statement which clearly affects the perception of security for Kosovo Serbs, when Vučić says there will be a storm, a storm means referring to the ethnic cleansing of Serbs in Croatia, why isn't there an international response to such a statement, saying that we are here, at the very least, KFOR is here, ULEX is here, this cannot happen? Why
I think this is something that everybody understands. So I think there are...
Serbs of the North sometimes need to hear it.
Sure, that may well be true, but they see KFOR on the ground every day. They will have seen a lot more of ULEX on the ground every day for the last more than a few months now. So I don't think this is... I think we have, as always, to kind of step away from political rhetoric and look at the reality. And we've also seen statements from President Vučić in the last few months that recognise that reality. President Vučić himself says, we aren't going to go against Kosovo because it would mean going against NATO. He's absolutely right, it would. And so I think the NATO mission remains in place. KFOR has a role to play. We are part of that, and we will continue to be part of that. So I think in the bigger terms of security, the international community, NATO, the European Union, are all committed to the security of Kosovo, all committed to the security in the north of Kosovo. Now, at the same time, we have a very sensitive situation at the moment, following the municipal elections that took place. And we now need to really see what happens next.
You've been ambassador. I want to take you back to the summer of last year, because through this time that you've been ambassador, we've had probably one of the more dramatic times of security in the north, from 2011, when a Serbian, when a Kosovo police Zumberi was killed. We haven't had such tension for a long time. Some scenarios repeated itself that we didn't think are going to happen again. I want to go back to when you were first started receiving information about possibility of barricades, armed people, how that happened, because EULEX accepted that there were armed men coming up. What did you know about it before the security situation?
I think it came as a surprise and a shock to everybody. I think the way in which it happened was not expected. So in some ways, when you review that period, you look at what preparations, what else could have happened, what else we could have done to be more aware. That's not an easy thing to do. You know, we are talking about the issues around proximity, issues around the ability of certain groups to use civilian vehicles, for example, very quickly. And so it's a difficult problem, but it's one where, as we saw again in December, there is no need to rush to action. There is a need to take time, consider the situation, and look at what are the best tools to resolve it. That doesn't always mean you have to take action yourselves. It may be that you need to allow space for political negotiation, or for security negotiation on the ground. So I think when we look at how things play out, we need to look at various, and I know always all security agencies do a whole range of different plans. So there are different plans for different things happening.
So right, there's security agencies, and then there's also other agencies that may be putting up their efforts to destabilize Kosovo. And I want to bring you back to the beginning of Ukraine being invaded by Russia.
Yeah.
To that time, you were ambassador, and we saw internationally Britain's unreserved support for Ukraine. How did that translate into the kind of focus your country decided to have on Western Balkans, and how the Ukraine war may spill over? Did you relook at the map and your presence, even military presence of KFOR here because of that invasion? What happened?
So I think you're looking at a bigger analysis there, one about how the war in Ukraine may spill over. The reality is that in military terms, it's unlikely to spill over into the Western Balkans. The issue is much more around destabilization, the use of disinformation, and using that for political effect within the Western Balkans. I don't think we're going to see military forces involved. However, of course, we have a British contingent within KFOR.
How big is that?
It's roughly around the size of a platoon, so it can be between up to 40, 50 people. And what they're part of KFOR, they operate under the commander.
Where are they based today?
So they're based in Kosovo.
All over Kosovo?
Well,
or in
not all over, but
Kosovo?
mostly in around Film City and elsewhere. And so that's something we've done for a long time. We also provide the strategic reserve to KFOR, and that means that every year we have a company of soldiers who come and basically go on exercise here in Kosovo. That usually happens around the autumn, and in doing so, that's a way of them being aware of the situation on the ground, allowing them sometimes to do operational tasks on behalf of KFOR, which they did last autumn.
There's an impression from last autumn, or information that comes from the north, from researchers in the north. There was a mention that Serbian, basically the British forces are more present and visible than ever before. Is there a reason for that?
Simply that people have noticed them. I mean, the visibility is not depends on the task, but the visibility doesn't actually mean there's a change in posture, or there's a change in presence, or a change in numbers. You know, this is an ongoing commitment by the United Kingdom that is not going to change. You know, it's part of our commitment to NATO, but it's also part of our commitment to Kosovo. And as far as I can tell, that's a very stable commitment. As for the Western Balkans as a whole, I think what we're seeing now, we've got over the kind of immediate response to Ukraine, and as you are aware, you know, the United Kingdom continues to provide support. President Zelensky, who's just been in the United Kingdom meeting with our Prime Minister and our Foreign Secretary, we are looking at continuing to provide military support for the defense of Ukraine. So within those terms, obviously the Western Balkans is very much on the agenda of ensuring that we're not seeing further destabilization in Europe. And that's, I think, also one of the challenges we face in terms of that situation in the north. Okay, but
can we go a little bit deeper on what is this destabilization? Because while you praise how the crisis was managed, everybody was patient and it was managed. Nevertheless, there was quite a lot of impatience from the Kosovo side, government, who expected KFOR to remove the barricades much faster than they were in the end. So it created an impression that it is not the Western's interest necessarily to help Kosovo freedom of movement, as long as people are not, as you say, destabilizing or killing each other. It can continue to, this situation of barricades can continue. That was the feeling from the perspective of people who were every day seeing those barricades not being removed by KFOR. What would you say to...
I'd say that my job isn't to deal with the feelings of people. I think the job of myself, my colleagues, KFOR, the head of ULEX, is to deal with the realities on the ground. And I think the Kosovan government has to accept that KFOR and ULEX have a particular role. And whilst they may be frustrated that things are not happening as quickly as they may want them to, that the responsibility for that security situation is with KFOR and ULEX having a role. And so they need to leave the space for those experts to approach the problem in the best way possible.
So to deal with realities on the ground means that if there are barricades, KFOR will let them run until they exhaust themselves there, right? Is that the strategy?
No, I don't think. I mean, you're assuming that there is one strategy for every situation.
Well, let's look at that strategy. What was the strategy? Why weren't barricades removed sooner?
Because there was a decision that the ability to do so would depend on a variety of different factors, which would put lives at risk. Now, in that situation, the lives at risk are those of KFOR, possibly of ULEX. That is the responsibility, therefore, of KFOR and ULEX to decide how best to approach the removal of those barricades.
So if I want to destabilize Kosovo, I will have to just be violent enough to give the impression that I'm going to kill even the strongest alliance in the world, NATO, and NATO would step back and take that seriously.
Well, I'd say you're exaggerating the situation.
I am, for the purposes of the conversation.
You're not destabilizing Kosovo.
But I'm making a scenario that a few masked men, armed, rogue, can scare off an entire strongest alliance.
So how many is a few?
10, 20, 30?
Well, clearly wasn't that, is it? As we all know, there were more. No, I don't know how many exactly.
Okay.
But I think the idea, but the idea that you're going to have action taken that causes violence, that causes greater tension, that has unintended consequences, is not a decision that's easily taken. And I think in those situations you have to accept that the responsibility for that security situation is elsewhere. And is
Where was it?
Is within KFOR and ULEX. It's not within the Kosovan government. That, I'm afraid, is the reality of that situation. It is for them, those people, those individuals, those systems as well. Decisions within NATO are not simply the whim of one individual. So there are whole processes that take place.
I understand, but KFOR is here precisely because of people like that, to ensure security. It's not here for other purposes. So if it can't do that, if it's not trained to deal with 100 masked violent men in the barricades, then what is it there for?
So why do you think it did not deal with the situation in December?
It lasted a long time.
It lasted a few weeks.
That's not a long time.
No.
By your standards.
Not at all. I mean, I've been involved in conflicts in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Syria. Those lasted more than a few weeks.
I know, but Kosovo is in Europe. We expect
well, we have
KFOR
we have a war in Europe that's been going on since February last year. So I'm afraid a few weeks in December is not long.
So in the end, if you call that, if you define it as success, what is the recipe? What made the situation deflate? What are lessons learned to this day? It deflated, but it's not resolved.
No, I don't think it's resolved, but this is where you get back to, you move away from the security issues back into the political ones. And the political issues that remain are a lack of trust between the Kosovan Serb community in the north and the Kosovan government. And that shows itself in a whole series of ways. As I said, we're now looking at a situation after the municipal elections with the appointment of mayors, which again is a complicated and difficult situation.
Can I be more blunt than that and say we tried, it all began because of the announcement that the car plates will be removed, the Serbian car plates, and Kosovo car plates would have to be imposed. This got to the resignations of the police, of the prosecutors, of the judges. In the end, today, we're looking at the situation where car plates have not been removed, institutions are without people because courts, police, prosecution remains resigned. Can we say it bluntly that it was a mistake to deal with the situation the way that Kosovo government chose to deal with it? Was it a mistake?
No, I think the Kosovan government had to take decisions within a rather limited sphere of influence. I think it's not true to say that the license plate issue has not been resolved. Parts of it have, and I think whilst there are undoubtedly issues around KM car plates entering Kosovo, within Kosovo, this now seems to be much less of an issue. And indeed, up until a point in March, many people were changing registering their cars in high numbers. That's not been the case since a car was burnt again. And so that's not really a responsibility of the Kosovan government. I think they are trying to resolve that issue. I think we see ourselves in an almost ongoing situation of tension. There is a need for much greater cooperation on a series of issues. Let's take the mayors. In legal terms, the Kosovan government is absolutely correct to do what it's been doing. This isn't a situation they chose. The previous mayors withdrew themselves from the positions, and so elections had to take place. The president postponed those once, but clearly postponing further was not going to work.
So there isn't any advice that international community, or let's say the Quint Group, gave the Kosovo government, say you should have done it like this and this wouldn't happen. There isn't such a
No, because
a wise man and women's group to have suggested that something else would have worked.
I mean, I think you can suggest other action. You don't know what the result will be. So let's assume that they had been postponed again, the elections, and we waited another 3 months. We would probably find ourselves back in the same situation again. And you're pushing off the inevitable. So the Kosovan government went forward legally, and is now in a situation where we have new mayors that are about to be sworn in. Again, that's perfectly legal. The challenge, though, is the political reality of all this. And the political reality is that this is not representational. Let's flip the coin. Let's imagine that we're actually in a situation where in 4 Albanian majority municipalities, Serb mayors are about to be sworn in. How acceptable would that be?
We've had that situation for 10 years during the Milošević era.
You have.
We built parallel institutions because of that.
So how acceptable would that be? And I'm sure the Kosovan government would tell me that they legally would be perfectly acceptable. But the political reality is that it wouldn't.
We are raising that question constantly in the media here. But what is your suggestion? Now that the situation, no one's fault, has come to this, because legally, as you say, Kosovo government was obliged to do this, and they did go through the motion. What can it be done from now on?
So I think there needs to be a recognition that this is not political representation. That the new mayors being in position will allow administrative measures to go forward. It's important that the municipalities have people in place, because there are decisions that need to take place about important issues within municipalities. From what I hear from my team, the people in Zubin Potok are more concerned about a bridge that got washed away in the winter than they are about who exactly is going to be running the municipality. There are practical things that need to be done. At the same time, I think the government needs to recognise that this is not an ideal situation politically.
I know, and the Albanian mayors have committed to dealing with a bridge that's being run down.
So these things therefore need to happen.
But politically, what can be done to actually improve to make it a real representation of the people there?
So I think there needs to be. This is where it becomes part of the bigger international negotiation that is going on, which should be around finding ways that the Kosovan Serbs return to the institutions. And the Kosovan government should do its most to enable that.
But this isn't part of the talks that Kurti and Vučić are having. This isn't at all in the agenda, which surprises me. Why isn't there pressure from the EU for them to resolve this more urgent matter?
So you won't be surprised if I say that's a question you should pose to the European Union?
I should pose to the European Union, but just in case, I was hoping that you had this discussion amongst yourself, the Quint Group.
Well, we do, but that doesn't mean, but then there is a whole process.
Okay. Can I go back to information on the North a little bit more deeper into the fact that there were groups such as Wagner groups in the North? What information does your government have about that?
I have no information that Wagner Group were in the North. I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about it. There's no evidence of that. In some ways, it may be wishful thinking to try and raise tensions.
No, they had insignia in their T-shirts as Wagner Group, isn't that
There are lots of
obvious?
people in Kosovo who wear Union Jacks on their jackets, their cars, their bags. That doesn't mean they have a British nationality.
Well, there was a protest in Jarinje, and KFOR did say that it's a dangerous group. Did you hear of any evaluation that the border points may be burned down again?
No.
The reason why I'm asking you this security question is because Kosovo's Prime Minister Kurti said that ambassadors know more than we do. So I get information from ambassadors over security situation. Are you one of those ambassadors, or just the US is?
No, I think all ambassadors obviously tap into networks that give them insight and information. Those are not. That's not necessarily. That doesn't necessarily mean we see more or know more than the Kosovan government, because we work closely with the Kosovan government as well.
Okay, when you say that security forces here, KFOR is here to make sure Kosovo doesn't get destabilized, one of the things that was evident at the time of this crisis is that when Pantić was arrested, there was no way for him to get from Jarinje elsewhere where he needed to be. Why nobody from the partners, security partners, gave Kosovo a helicopter? Kosovo didn't even have a helicopter to do that transport. Why is that?
Why does Kosovo not have a helicopter?
No, why didn't any of the partners, international partners, help Kosovo with a helicopter?
Because at the time there was an issue of security and movement.
Even on helicopter?
Yes,
there
of
would
course,
be a
there always will be.
So that was viewed also risky to fly from Jarinje,
I mean, again,
to center of Kosovo.
These are not things that the British ambassador has responsibility for. You really need to ask the people who were involved.
But there was no request from Kosovo government to hire a helicopter from you. You cannot
not
from KFOR.
No.
Okay. In the end, Pantić was released from detention, and our prime minister called the prosecutor who decided that, he called him a traitor. Is this political influence injustice?
I don't have an opinion, to be very honest.
You don't have an opinion. Mm-hmm. We'll go to other topics then that I'd like to discuss with you. It has to do with media. We saw a lot of news in the north about a news against KFOR, a lot of news about a British KFOR, a lot of fake news about it. Do you see this as a tendency of a certain campaign to discredit KFOR soldiers, British soldiers too?
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly people. Let's come back to that bigger issue of destabilization within the Western Balkans. This isn't just an issue in Kosovo, it's an issue throughout the region. You know, there are clearly those with an interest to undermine the position of NATO, of the European Union, of partners like the United Kingdom within the Western Balkans. That's part of the environment, the political and security environment we now find ourselves in, and something we're having to deal with every day. I mean, the disinformation around UK forces is just that. I mean, it in some ways is ridiculous and rather laughable, because we're not doing what people seem to think we're doing.
On the other hand, the UK has made the blacklist of non-grata people in Kosovo. Milan Radojcic is there. What does it take for UK to put somebody on a blacklist?
Oh gosh, I mean, we would be here for several hours if I took you through all the legal procedures. It's a very complicated process. It depends on a variety of different legal evidences that need to be provided into a legal process. It is not a political decision. It requires quite a few judicial tests before it can be put in place. So it isn't something we use a great deal, but it will be something we do in certain circumstances.
So what signal does a country like UK want to send if it puts somebody in a blacklist and makes it public?
So it wants to show very clearly that we believe that there are individuals who are acting, in this case criminally, and who are very involved both in criminality and corruption, and that should be, there should be action taken against them as a country that we do, the UK, but obviously we do that publicly so that others are aware that we've done it.
Mm. And should we expect that some Albanian will end up on that list, Kosovo Albanian?
Quite possible. I mean, there are people in Albania itself who are currently on that list, so there is no kind of...
So there are Albanians on blacklist too,
Absolutely.
But they are from Albania?
At the moment, yes.
Okay. What sign does it give? I mean, you told me what's the signal that your country wants to send, but what's the signal you think it gives when President of Serbia stands next to Milan Radojcic in a photo after Radojcic is put on a blacklist?
Yeah, these are difficult messages, so it's obviously difficult for us. The question obviously is, what are we expected to understand from that? Okay,
that's the department of, I guess, a UK ambassador in Serbia, but your department is that you meet Goran Rakic here in Kosovo, who's in the leadership of Srpska Lista, the party where Milan Radojcic also is. What do you say to Rakic when you meet him? Do you raise this question of the blacklist?
No.
You don't raise it?
He doesn't raise it with me, I don't raise it with him. These sanctions...
Isn't this your country's policy to remind him that people in his party are in the blacklist?
Not at all. These sanctions are focused on individuals. They don't have an impact on their contacts, their family or others.
But this individual is member of Srpska Lista, leadership of Srpska Lista, and Goran Rakic is. It's not a problem for you to work with their party, with one member?
Well, the sanctions are not in place because of their membership of Srpska Lista.
How is it possible that Milan Radojcic, I would ask you, is in that list, and his Albanian partners in crime, which we know of, and we published investigations on it, are not?
Well, let's go back to what I said before. It's about the UK processes. It's not about Kosovan processes.
In the UK process, the Albanian partners in crime to Milan Radojcic are okay?
No. I mean, I'm certainly not saying that any partners in crime are okay, but it may be that they don't meet the legal requirements for us to go forward with a process of sanction.
Now, looking at what agreements were made in Ohër and Brussels, what do you think is new? Do you expect anything new? For people who've been here before you came here as ambassador, these are recycled agreements. They speak of things already that have been discussed and talked about and signed from 2011 onwards. Is there anything that convinces you that these are not just recycled material for a new photo op? Is there anything more serious in these agreements?
I think in terms of this point in time, this context, a land war in Europe, the importance of the agreement is really to ensure that there is progress, practical progress. I mean, you will have seen the statement I made last week. My view, in particular on the association, is that it's time for the Kosovan government to come up with a draft statute. That should be based on the Prime Minister's vision, if they so wish.
I remember you were consistent on this even first time you came for an interview here.
So it doesn't go away.
So it's 3 years ago you said to me that Kosovo must do it.
Yeah, I've said it to quite a few people since.
Yeah, and in the end we end up with that situation. But can you tell me, in little moves, did Kosovo make a mistake by first allowing the draft statute to be made out of people that it inherited from last governments and then dismissed them? Was that tactical mistake?
So there's a thing in psychology which is called woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
And it's, we would have done that, we should have done that, we could have done that.
Okay.
It is of no value, either in international relations or in politics. The reality is the reality we live in now.
Okay, so what to do now?
So I was going to say, there's no point in regretting the decisions. What I would say is there needs to be greater acknowledgement that those agreements were made and that Kosovo signed up to them.
Oh, there's an acknowledgement. You've had the biggest critic of that agreement sign this agreement. So I don't think international community can complain that Kosovo's side has not ingested something that was refusing to.
Let's be clear. The Kosovan government, Prime Minister Kurti, offered to sign, but President Vučić said he would not. So the Kosovan government has not signed an agreement.
It offered to sign whenever you guys are ready. Kosovo government offered it
whenever
EU is ready. I mean, so it's a big step. Is it recognized in the West what a big step this is?
No, because it's not a signature. in the same way it was not a signature
Well,
from Serbia.
there was no offer to sign it. Prime Minister said he would sign.
So we're not comparing offers. There are two Brussels agreements that Kosovo has signed, that Kosovo as a state is committed to. There are people here who have come into positions of responsibility in the Kosovan government who are not happy with that and would really rather not recognise those signatures. That isn't how international relations works. The state of Kosovo is committed. If you take on a position of responsibility within the state of Kosovo, you have to accept that the state is committed.
Well, it's committed again.
So the state has committed to an association.
And the Prime Minister committed again, said Prime Minister, who as opposition leader was against this agreement, said, right, I commit myself to sign what previously you in the Brussels agreed. So why aren't we rewarded? Let me put it more bluntly. Why isn't Kosovo rewarded for having done this?
So what's the reward?
Reward? What is the reward?
What is the reward?
For Kosovo to enter the Council of Europe, at the very least.
So we were very clear that Kosovo's membership of the Council of Europe should not be linked to the dialogue. I don't believe it should. The United Kingdom government doesn't believe it should. We believe that Kosovo, as a state, has a right to be a member of the Council of Europe.
Okay, I'll tell you another reward. The reward would be what people would expect, people on the ground, on the street maybe, would expect that when Vučić continues his campaign to stop Kosovo's entry into Council of Europe, because part of the agreement is not to stop Kosovo entering international organizations, then the West would say, hang on, this is unacceptable.
So you are entering into the ambiguity of the agreements, which don't specify when the implementation starts.
So we can continue posing, going to Ohrid, going to Brussels, posing that we are negotiating, but continue to block, and commitment will not count for anything? No.
I mean, I think, again, let's come back to the reality of where we are. The reality of where we are is that international attention is not going to continue on Kosovo forever. Kosovo does not own the timetable on this. There's a war in Ukraine. At some point that will come to an end. There are crises elsewhere in the world. Look at Sudan. International attention is not going to stick with this issue. Now is the time for the Kosovan government to take the initiative to come up with a draft statute based on what it thinks it can offer to move the issue of the association forward. We do not believe that the association has to be the prerequisite for anything else. But that again is for the European Union and for Special Envoy Lajčák to work out how to move things forward. Now, I think the best way is Kosovo engaging fully, coming up with that draft statute and then negotiating sincerely with the intention of completing this. My preference, of course, would be to complete it this calendar year. Let's get this out of the way. We need to move on. Kosovo needs to move on. Because the risk is that Kosovo will find itself in an area, in a limbo, in an area where there is no progress, and frankly the international community decides it has better things to do. And that is a dangerous place to be.
I want to change topic a little bit and talk about the economy. During your time here, you've seen a change of government, and a new government said that because it came, there is a change of governance, there will be more investment coming because they will not be corrupt. You, during your time here, have you seen any British new investment to come in the country?
I've seen greater interest. I haven't yet seen greater investment. I think we have to be honest and say, the period of COVID, the period of 2 years, essentially froze a lot of things. And it's really only been perhaps in the last 8-9 months that we're seeing a change in that. I mean, not so much within Kosovo. I think Kosovo has actually bounced out of COVID quite quickly. but I don't think Western Europe, the United Kingdom, has. There have been a variety of economic challenges. I think what I'm seeing is not at the major investment level a great interest, but certainly in the kind of smaller service-related industries. We're seeing quite a lot of interest from young Kosovan British nationals based in the UK, looking for business opportunities.
What are the obstacles they talk about? If you hear their,
I mean, as you know, this is another perennial subject, which is essentially around the rule of law. We have a system here where commercial cases, if they go to court, take a very long time to resolve.
This is a key.
This is key. Yeah.
For example, there's an impression sometimes that the Kosovo relationship with Serbia is what dissuades investors from coming in. Is that an issue? Security?
I mean, companies undoubtedly look at the region as a whole. If you are a medium-sized business that is working to import into the UK, looking for manufactured products, maybe looking to invest in distribution, it will look at the Western Balkans as a whole. And as always, there will be issues around risk insurance, there will be issues around political stability, which for those who don't really know the region, will leave questions. Okay,
since you picked out as a key reason being the courts, their delays, tell me, what is your analysis after 3.5 years here of the problems with rule of law in general? What we would say are the problems, considering that you have projects as a government on that field?
Yeah, I mean, I think there remain some real challenges. To be fair, I think this government has addressed and is still trying to address quite a few of them. It's hard going. It's really quite difficult. There are a series of vested interests that do not want the government to succeed, who wish to protect their own interests, and who will at all turns use whatever tools are available to do so. So we've worked closely with the government on issues such as improving, vetting, improving rule of law processes, looking at issues around corruption, issues around money laundering. These are all vital if the Kosovan government is going to be able to function properly and also therefore offer commercial opportunities.
What you're saying is very important. That's why I would stop here, because you are saying there are vested interests that are stopping this government make judicial reforms, rule of law reforms, while this government, we are in a climate where this government is being criticized massively for not allowing, for putting pressure on the prosecution, not allowing the chief prosecutor to be chosen, putting pressure on the prosecution that is going after investigating Vendosja's guy in Kek, Nagib Krasniqi, and highlighting all this and the idea that you are putting forward, that actually there are vested interests, that the government, that are fighting the government, is nowhere really out there in the public, let's say, sphere. So what is happening?
So are you doing your job properly yet?
We don't consider highlighting what government does in this case, because we can in rule of law, because we actually take rule of law separate, independent, and criticizing the rule of law institutions themselves, having investigations against recently a bribery against the head of appeals court in Kosovë, catching them in action, not necessarily linking them with government, because we find that's a separate department. But tell me a bit more about these vested interests. How do you see the judiciary resisting reform?
I mean, I think what we have is a perception of the judiciary and the prosecution as wanting to use their independence as a means of protecting their own interests. Let's take the case of the chief state prosecutor. I wrote to the head of the Prosecution Council and offered to provide the services of the company we use to help with meritocratic recruitment, because it seemed to me that we could help the Prosecution Council in bringing greater credibility to the process of choosing the next Chief State Prosecutor. That's not a process that I'm involved in or the British Embassy is involved in. It is an independent company. They refused that. Now, in doing so, I think they missed an opportunity, because I don't think the general perception of these two institutions is a positive one. I think there needs to be much greater transparency from both sides. And I think they also need to take into consideration that what may have been acceptable practices in the past are no longer acceptable.
Yeah, now they're screaming wolf, saying the government is not allowing judicial institutions to do their job.
Well, I'm not surprised, because that's an easy defensive line that they can use. Again, I think they use the important position, the important principle of independence to hide behind, frankly. And I think they should be much more ready to modernise themselves, to become more transparent, and to really think about what their ultimate duty is, which is to act as an independent institution within the state of Kosovo. That brings with it a series of duties which sometimes seem lacking.
So you see the election of Blerim Isufaj as head prosecutor by that prosecutorial council as not very credible, because they refused the
No, it's not that it's not very credible.
Yeah.
It's that if they had allowed an independent group to be involved, to bring greater credibility, both to the choice of candidates, to the way in which they were interviewed, would have given them greater credibility. As we've seen, there is a lack of credibility to that choice. We've seen the challenges that have gone to the Constitutional Court. You know, these are serious issues. It should not be a case of arm wrestling between one institution of the state with another. You know, there needs to be a way found forward which works for everybody. And again, is much more transparent.
And where your company was involved, the British company for recruitment was involved, in a very important post, choosing the head of the central bank. Actually, an underdog, a woman, came first, which was an unusual, incredible find, because she was fired just a few months before for non-competence, while the British company evaluated her as the most competent. That was quite amazing, but the whole process came to nothing as it's annulled.
So this is, you know, it is not that we involve ourselves to provide the final decision. That is not our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the institution that is doing the recruitment, whether that's the government, whether that's the assembly. Ultimately, responsibility lies with them and should lie with them, because they should take the political responsibility.
I know, but what happens when the recommendation of your company is not taken?
Yeah.
The whole process, not only not taken, but the whole process goes to waste.
Yeah.
British taxpayers' money has gone to waste. So what do you say to Kosovo institutions?
We say we will not involve ourselves again with that particular recruitment process.
Is that enough? They say, fine, we'll do it without you.
Indeed, but again, they are taking the political responsibility for doing that.
You are doing exactly what they want. They're putting you in a corner and saying, yes, thank you, we don't take your advice, continue with the rest of the project. You're doing exactly what they prefer you to do. And keep wasting, maybe it's a waste of British taxpayers' money then.
Well, of the recruitments we've done under this government, 2/3 have gone through. So 2/3 were a process where you have the interview panel and you have our company proposing candidates who meet the requirements and who are believed to be able to do the job. Of those, somebody is chosen. Again, it's not, we don't do the choosing. That's done by the institution.
So
So in those cases, you have people who are chosen. 2/3, that's fairly good. At the same time, and I think there is a certain level of responsibility that we have in that process, but ultimately, if the government or the assembly decide they wish to annul and to rerun the process, then I think it's for the institutions and civil society in Kosovo to question why, and to question what it is that they're trying to achieve by that.
Can you just specify if there is a new recruitment for the head of a central bank, British government with this independent company of recruitment will not be involved?
No, we won't.
Even if Kosovo begs you to do it?
Absolutely.
Not
there have been, the precedent has already been set. We will not do so a second time.
How important do you think that post is?
I'm sure it's very important.
Are there other posts that maybe not in our radar that have been like this annulled while you were here, or gone to waste, or British companies' recommendation has not
yes, there are about
taken?
a third of them, as I say. 2/3 of them, a third have not.
You say 2/3 have not been taken?
No, 2/3 have been taken.
Have been taken.
A third have not.
Third have not. So would you, on top of your head, know any others that have not been taken?
No, you'd have to get me to think about that for a bit while.
Just on the field of rule of law, there is a vetting process going on. How can, for example, money laundering, which is something at the radar of British government, happen if there is no vetting that was pronounced? Do you believe that there will be vetting in the police, in the prosecution, or are we losing that?
I think there should be vetting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the conversations that I had with the government are clearly around what are the aims of that vetting, and as I regularly tell them, the British Foreign Office has a vetting system as well. I'm vetted every 7 years.
You are vetted every 7 years?
I'm vetted every 7 years.
Interesting. So just for the exercise of the Kosovo to know about what does that involve,
Sure.
How do they vet you?
So you're vetted through a long questionnaire that you have to fill in. You have to fill in a lot of detail about your family. You have to fill in a lot of detail about your friends, regular contacts. You have to fill in and provide, obviously, financial information on bank accounts, investments, loans, mortgages. You then have to provide information about your personal life, and you will then have an interview, usually of around 2 hours, which will go through those details.
And we are talking for 10 years on vetting, about vetting and not doing it through a simple questionnaire. Therefore, how vulnerable do you think our rule of law system is? When as Britain, you look at Kosovo rule of law, what do you say?
I think it's very vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
Clearly. But then there are a lot of vulnerabilities about the Kosovan state.
I'm just curious that what do you say to people, investors, say if they ask you about rule of law versus about politics in Kosovo? Because there's a frustration amongst people that you can never elect other parts of leadership in Kosovo, like rule of law. You can only elect politicians. So if democracy has not given us this right as people to somehow make the rule of law accountable, what do you do?
Well, ultimately it is for the governments to hold those institutions accountable.
But everybody says you government shouldn't be meddling your fingers into rule of justice. Everybody criticizes them when they meddle.
So I think there needs to be a more sophisticated view of what meddling means. Any government in any country in Western Europe is expected to set the rules and regulations and put those in place. It's expected to do so preferably in a democratic way, usually involving a parliament or an assembly, in order to ensure that is politically and democratically acceptable. That isn't meddling. That is the normal business of government. And that takes place in the UK as much as it does in Kosovo. So I think what is needed, and it's for this government to defend what it has done, but I think from my 3.5 years here, I think we have seen a government that has certainly tried, and in some cases succeeded, in pushing forward the issues around rule of law. I think there's a greater consciousness now. I think it's a very difficult agenda, and I think the reality is that I would hope any future government, all future governments, will commit to a very serious programme, because reform is needed.
In terms of, just to stay a little bit on money laundering, what are the things that UK wants to see get reformed to ensure Kosovo doesn't become a money laundering place, especially from money laundered from UK to Kosovo?
Sure. I mean, we work very closely with the customs and tax authorities, partly to strengthen them as institutions, to make them more effective. And I think we've seen both those institutions improve over my time here. And I'd very much, that's in part because of our support, I hope, but also I think because the two institutions themselves are very ready to address the issues and to make changes and to ensure that operationally they can deliver for the government. Money laundering is a risk throughout this region. And you know, what's needed is to ensure that you have a regulatory base that allows cases to be brought forward. Okay,
you say money laundering is a risk throughout the region, but during your time ambassador here, I have heard the British government's very racist declarations against Albanians in UK, calling them invaders. So why is it that Albanians are being picked out, especially, and Kosovo is 95% Albanian? Why is there a rise on anti-Albanianism among the British people?
I think we're confusing a lot of issues in one go there.
I am, but I want to hear you about it.
So what you are referring to is the response around the illegal migration that's been going into the UK, where last year we saw 45,000 Albanians arrive on the south coast of England in small boats.
Is that a lot? Like you asked me, I would ask you back.
A good question.
That a lot?
So at the beginning of last year, the number was around 100. So what we saw was an exponential increase throughout the summer, up until the summer. And of course, the weather changes and it becomes more difficult to do.
To clarify, these are Albanians from Albania?
This is what I was going to say to you. I regularly have contact with the Home Office on this issue and also on their people who work in the region on these issues. Up until now, I have no evidence that any Kosovan is included in that number.
Nevertheless, 45,000 Albanians. If you have contact with the Home Office regularly, how many others? Are there no other groups apart from Albanians being more than 45,000?
No, there aren't.
There aren't. No. Albanian groups are the most
in 2022
asking for asylum in UK.
Well, in 2022, not all 45,000 have asked for asylum, but in 2022 they were the largest number.
I know, but okay, but we've never heard the Home Office highlight and stigmatize a group like this when in the past, say if there were more Syrians, say Syrians, Arabs, highlighting it, calling them invaders. It's still, the statements are still out of proportion.
So there is let's be very clear. This is a very important domestic political issue in the United Kingdom. It can't be ignored. And my colleague in Tirana spends a lot of his time working on this issue. It's obviously also an important domestic political issue in Albania. But this is not something that is a particular issue for me here. It's something I've discussed with the Ministry of Interior, really just to ensure that they're aware of what's happening, what we're doing, we're doing with Albania, because we cooperate at a lot of different levels, and it's important to share information.
Okay, I presume there's nothing in sight as making liberalization of visas for Kosovo Albanians
not
to
that
UK
I'm aware of. Not that
after the liberalization in the EU?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, I want to ask you a little bit about a sovereign fund that is being presented as a new fund that will improve the public enterprises in Kosovo. How much do you know about it? Do you think it can be of interest of British investors?
I mean, it's not something I've looked in detail. I think at the moment the issue is how the funds are going to go into that fund and how it's going to be managed. That's going to be very key. And there's going to have to be a very clear offer in terms of what that investment opportunity will be. I'm not saying there won't be interest, but again, my impression with the UK companies, they don't look at Kosovo individually, they're looking at the region as a whole.
And we spoke about people leaving Albania, but maybe they're in a bigger number to UK, but generally the entire region is suffering from brain loss. Professionals see a much more Europe and the West as a place to practice their professional careers. What do you think, and what do you think should the Kosovo government, regional too, can be doing to stop people leaving and not invading your countries?
Well, I don't think they're invading, but I think you've got a situation, a combination of issues. And this is, in terms of Kosovo in particular, but to be honest, it must be the case for Serbia and elsewhere as well. The political instability, which continues, is simply undermining the ability of governments to address the issues that matter. And which is why I said earlier, it would be very good if we could get some of these dialogue issues out of the way in this calendar year. Governments in Kosovo and elsewhere in the region have to focus on health, on education, on economic and job opportunities. So bringing that investment in, that's not easy. But I mean, if you step back from the immediate issues that we all get caught up in, the reality is that Kosovo and the region suffer from issues around around energy and the economy that need not to be resolved because you can't resolve them, but you need to manage them in a better way. What are the prospects for Kosovo in terms of energy supply? What are the prospects for creating the kinds of service industries that young Kosovans, who it seems to me have great potential, the young people I meet are always impressive, impressive in their curiosity, in their interest, in their ability. Yet they are let down by poor education systems, poor health services, all of which mean that the attraction of somewhere else is greater. When I talk to people about visa liberalisation, I'm always struck that there's an element of wishful thinking. There's a belief that people will leave Kosovo and they will come back, or they will continue to provide money to their families back here, as the diaspora have done for the last 20 years. I'm pessimistic about that. I think if young people leave and start lives elsewhere, start relationships elsewhere, they may well not come back. And the risk is that Kosovo, but other countries in the Western Balkans as well, simply end up providing, labour to Western Europe and elsewhere. And that's not really a credible future.
Talking about these young people, yes, majority are, like you say, curious, cosmopolitan, but there is a darker side to this. And in the last month, we've had 8 people arrested on the charges of terrorism. There is accusation that they are ISIS. They're accused of representing ISIS activities. Most of them are, what worries me most is over 1 month. We thought we left this behind when the Syria war. It's worrying. Most of them are under 24, which means they're born much later. They were very little when ISIS war started in Syria. There is a signal that we are entering some re-radicalization, re-religious radicalization phase. What is your experience in UK with this? And should we worry that 8 people being arrested on these charges, terrorism charges, over 1 month is serious?
One should always worry about anybody being caught up in this. I would say this isn't re-radicalization. I don't think this has gone away. radicalization continues to happen in the United Kingdom, not at the levels that we saw maybe 10 years ago when ISIS and Daesh were very much more active in Syria and Iraq. But the fundamental issues around radicalization have not changed. The United Kingdom has a long experience now on these issues. We've actually been doing some work here with the government as well, with the Ministry of Interior, with one or two municipalities, really to share our own experience, but also to learn from the experience of people here. And indeed, one of our experts said to me at the end of last year that he had learned as much from being here as he had in the UK.
But there's been 2 years that the government didn't manage to approve anti-terrorist strategy. What needs to happen for these efforts to be more serious?
Well, I think where I would differentiate, there's a difference between a strategy, which is essentially a political statement of intent, to practical action on the ground. You said yourself, 8 people have been arrested. I mean, I can't give you the exact figures, but I'm sure it's many more in the United Kingdom, as you would expect in a much bigger country. So I think this is an issue that is going to be with us for some time to come. There are many different factors to radicalization, factors that involve the individual themselves, factors that involve the environment in which they live or were brought up in, factors that involve the attraction. As you know, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. One of the things that we learnt about Afghanistan and the attraction of many young Saudi men going to fight in Afghanistan, in this case against the Russians, but then of course later against NATO forces, was that this was seen as a heroic act, that this was seen as being part of being a man. And so there are lots of issues that it involves that are psychological, social, in some ways political. And what's important is to really get to the detail of that and understand what's happening, which is what we're trying to help Kosovo do.
Since you've got 7 months left in Kosovo, it might be that it's my last interview with you, so I don't want you to leave without telling me what did you like most about Kosovo? What do you continue to like most? If it's one thing, what is one thing?
So if there's one thing, it's the Kosovans.
It's the Kosovans. Okay, what is the city then? I'll be more specific. The town that most leaves more impression.
As my team know very well, I did my language immersion before becoming ambassador in Gjakova.
Gjakova?
So I lived for a month in Gjakova.
Ty s'pëlqen Prizreni ma shumë se Gjakova?
Jo.
Prizreni më maj bukur thojnë, këta t'hujt thojnë.
So my wife believes this. My wife believes that Prizren is the prettiest city.
E pas ka ble propaganda.
But if I want to live if I were to live as a free individual in Kosovo, I'd be living in Gjakova.
A je I sigurt që ti nuk e din që unë e kom origjine për Gjakovës?
No, nuk ishte e njohur.
Nuk po më thup se po më pëlqen.
Jo.
Okej. Cili është ushqimi që të pëlqen mas shumë ti në Kosovë?
I think it's probably spec me ajk.
Spec me moz, ti angles spec me moz?
Po.
S'është interesant me speci me moz?
It's a great taste.
Shumë e mira. Okej. Cili muze apo pjesë e Kosovës të ka lërë ma shumë të përshtypje?
Actually,
tash kjo është trick question I thuni ju, sepse
it's a trick question. So the Highlands of Brod.
Brod?
Yeah, if you go up to the top, the Highlands in Brod, I think that's a wonderful
Pajtona
place.
me ty, do me thonë Brodi. Naj muzikant të vendit që e pëlqen, vendor?
There's nothing specific. I mean,
ose diçka kulturore që të kalon përshtypje në Kosovë që ke po?
I do like poetry, but that's Albanian. It's not necessarily Kosovo.
E dini poete që të ka kërku me ja përkthy poezin e saj, shqiptare në anglisht. A ke me bo ajo?
Jo.
S'ki me bo. Okej, ajo qef ka. Edhe më fund pak për sport, mbro Manchester City e ka më poshtë Real Madridin, po duna me lexu se vetë nuk e di që ka ndodhë, po qështu po më thojnë kolegët, edhe ka me lujt në finale të Ligës Kampionëve. A mendon që ka me më poshtë kruciale Interin e Italisë?
Manchester City will win.
You're sure?
Of course.
Would you bet on it?
I'm not a betting man.
You're not a betting man. But people have seen you watch Kosovo games.
Of course.
Sports games.
I love watching Kosovo.
I haven't done that enough.
Well, you
how is
should.
that? How
Well,
is
you
that?
should. It's
What
great.
is your experience?
I love the atmosphere. You know, the Fardo Vokri Stadium is not a big stadium, and people may wish for a huge stadium in Kosovo because it shows status and all the rest. But having a small stadium means you're closer to the game, and the enthusiasm of the Dardanët, the enthusiasm of the team, the fact that there is such, I don't know, there's just such a feeling to it that I will always enjoy that.
Okay, last but not least, we've heard you're a fan of rugby. Are you gonna advance Kosovo's rugby talent?
Not as much as my predecessor, but I'm doing what I can to support them.
Are you still doing
Of course,
enough to
of course.
support? And you will continue?
I went to the first international match against Austria, which was great fun. I actually don't think anybody was too bothered about the score, but it was just such a great atmosphere.
Thanks very much,
My
Nicholas
pleasure.
Abbott, for being in Kosova. I hope you take good impressions from your time here.
Sigurisht.
Ishte ky Nicholas Abbott, ambasadori anglez në Kosovë, që ishte këtu 3 vjet e gjys, dhe është këtu deri në dhjetor dhe e shfrytzuam rastin ta kemi për përshtypjet e tij janë përgjithësi lidhur me sigurinë edhe tema tjera që i folëm. Kaq kemi për sonte, vazhdoni me na shkruajt në kallxo.com deri në emisionin e radhës. Mirëmbëjtje.